This is our special call July 2nd meeting, which is reconvened from June 30. And I'm calling this meeting to order. We have Peggy Buchanan joining us by Zoom. And I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda. Get a second? Second. And then I need to call the roll. Peggy Buchanan. Here. Good. Pat Bryant. Amy Churchill.
Here.
Thank you. Cindy McMahon.
Aye.
Donna Pate. Max Queen.
Present.
And Ian Franklin. So we've all approved the agenda, and we will now move to the action agenda. And I will recognize Dr. Baldwin and Ms. Swanger to talk to us about the reentry plans for Buncombe County Schools. And just for the public's information, while this kiosk appears pink on all the video that's coming out, it is not. It is a real nice maple color.
And with that, I'll begin. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to start by showing our board and our public a recent video that was produced by our outstanding communications department. It stars Ms. Jennifer Reed, who is the director of our elementary education, and it's all about Jump Start. And I'm going to pick up on one of our board members, Mr. Bryant. In a previous session, he recognized how important communication was. And I want to reemphasize that to everyone today. We are here primarily to make a decision. That decision is relevant to the particular option that if and when we are in Plan B of operations, this will be the particular model that our Plan B will look like. Back to the importance of communications. Communicating that decision is just every bit as important as the decision itself. We have to effectively communicate all of these decisions to not only our parents and our community stakeholders, but our employees ourselves. So again, I hope you enjoy this very brief video, because this will be, by the way, one of many. This will be the direction that we will go for that communication in many areas. They will be available on our website, a library for parents to view. We will also be using videos to train ourselves as employees and staff. This is regarding Jump Start, July 15th.
My name is Jennifer Reed. I'm the Director of Elementary and Intermediate Education for Buncombe County Schools. Welcome to our Summer Jump Start program. We are excited for this opportunity to offer your child valuable academic support as we prepare for a new school year. While this academic and social-emotional support is critical, we've also implemented many safety protocols to maintain the health and well-being of our staff and students during this time. We will provide you with a detailed document for these important procedures. In this video, we'll highlight some of the most important ones. First, if your child is a car rider, they will arrive at the front of the school and have a health screening that includes a temperature check. If they have a temperature above 100.4, they will be asked to wait in a privacy room until you can come pick them up. And here is our safety procedure for students who will ride the bus to their Jump Start location.
Feel good today? Let's take your temperature, bud.
Your child will have their temperature checked before they board the bus,
Hand sanitizer.
and they will be asked to sanitize their hands. Students will sit socially distanced on the bus and be required to wear a mask. Parents should wait with their child at the bus stop until the child is screened and cleared to ride the bus. The child does not need to be screened again once they arrive at the school. When all students arrive to their Jump Start program, they will remain with their assigned classmates and teacher for the entire day. You'll notice our classrooms are set up for an engaging learning experience for students while maintaining a safe distance from each other. Students will have their own supplies assigned to them in order to maintain a safe classroom environment. Also, throughout the day, students will have frequent opportunities for movement and play. Jump Start staff will be required to wear a face covering each day. It is strongly encouraged that students wear masks, especially for times where social distancing is difficult. Some staff will be allowed to wear clear face shields as needed for teaching and learning purposes, especially with our youngest students, as they are learning to read and need to see the teacher's mouth during instruction. Students will wash their hands frequently throughout the day. Common areas, such as the school's front lobby, will be marked to encourage social distancing, and students will wait at least 6 feet apart. For lunch, meals will be brought from the cafeteria to the classroom for students to enjoy. Thank you for allowing Buncombe County Schools the opportunity to work with your child in our Summer Jump Start program. We are excited for the chance to help prepare your child for a strong start to the 2021 school year.
Communications Department and Ms. Reed. This is going to be the one of many Return to Learn videos. That will be the common theme for Buncombe County Schools as we look toward the 2020-21 school year. In the next few minutes, I'm going to be turning this over to Mrs. Swanger to review the two options regarding Plan B that we are making to you, the board. I want to first off recognize that we were certainly prepared and looking forward to the governor's decision regarding which one of the three plans, A, B, or C, that schools across the state, including Buncombe County, would begin on August 17th. That said, we understand the importance of getting it right, and so therefore we will continue as advised to plan, to prepare. That has been ongoing, as I mentioned yesterday, since the middle of May for Buncombe County Schools. But the governor's decision, when it comes, is extremely important. Let me give you an example. As you recall, Plan A was, I used the very simplified term all in, everyone within the building, learning going on. Plan B is a mixture, some students in, some students out, primarily because of the 50% requirement and also the mandate that safety spacing of 6 feet must be maintained throughout at all times. Plan C is everyone is remote. Those are the three plans. If we began the school year in Plan B or Plan C, for example, we would be expected for some or all students to begin August 17th remote learning. Now think of the challenge of that in terms of communications out to parents and to those students to be ready to begin day one, August 17th, in a remote learning setting. That is just one example of the importance of where we begin, which one of these plans we begin as a school system. And the second thing I want you to keep in mind when we talk about the various plans, including Plan B, is the unknown time span. Think in terms of Plan B, for example, the hybrid, where some are in, some are out. They alternate in one of those models. Just think about this. The difference in if Plan B were instituted and we were in that Plan B mode for 2 weeks compared to a 6 to 8 week time span. And that would be true with any one of the three models. That's the unknown we're going to face, whether we like it or not, because as we've heard from so many public health officials, we're not in control of COVID-19 and the virus. So that time span is an unknown, but yet it's very relevant to how we look at each one of these plans. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Swanger. I'm going to ask her to review the two options that we presented yesterday, and I will tell you that for one of those options, the week on and week off, we heard loud and clear concerns, especially for that 9 through 12 group of students that were going to be on remote learning. So there is some supplement to that, again, relevant to the time span that is a challenge to us. Ms. Swanger?
Thank you, Dr. Baldwin. Good afternoon. Your concerns, and Mr. Allison, who is our high school representative on this important committee, we have done some significant planning and revising to what looks to be an orientation and could be a great solution if we are out more than 2 weeks. And it would give students an opportunity to be inside the classroom. I want to start, before I go through that, with reminding you, and this set into motion yesterday, it is so important that we offer a 100% remote option for families who have health concerns or are worried about safety of their child so they can remain home and work with a Buncombe County teacher. We've asked families to think of it in terms of at least first semester, and then we'll certainly revisit along the way, because the one thing that Dr. Baldwin kept mentioning is change, and we have to be adaptable and be able to move throughout whichever plan or work with families. And we commit to work with families to make them feel comfortable in their child's learning. So that information went out yesterday. Our communications had several questions that came through last night. We are creating an FAQ document to answer some of those questions. But again, we are in the planning stages, and we will certainly work with families to make that happen where there are those concerns. If you remember, we have Plan B and working through that 50% capacity and the 6 feet separation to keep health and safety at bay. We have an A week, B week model for K through 8, and our 9th through 12th graders being remote. If you will recall, we will that will allow us to space students out in the classrooms. We will limit movement throughout the buildings. We can do that very safely by the numbers in those classrooms and scheduling with parents so that they understand when their students are in school and when their students are remote. Again, teachers will be responsible for that face-to-face instruction and also working with students as they are remote on that off week. So controls of safety and health is in that plan, as well as plans for communication. And Dr. Baldwin mentioned the importance of communication. Parents need to know, they need to be able to plan. What we heard from you was the concern about high schoolers, so I'll save that and talk about that in just a minute, but we will think about this A week and B week as a blended model. Students will work through their learning management system, and that would be Seesaw, Google Classroom, and Canvas. They will have face-to-face experiences with their teachers inside a classroom. Students will not move other than for health and safety exercise purposes, and in the elementary grades, special teachers will go into the classroom, again, to keep that spacing and keep students working safely apart. The second plan that we talked about is that shared building concept. When you look at the students of an attendance district and you divide those students into multiple buildings, you use all the spaces so that you have about 14 to 15 students per classroom. And that's what we have found as we have moved furniture around and been working in several different buildings to see how many kids can we serve in a classroom safely. And it's anywhere from 14 to 16, depending on the size of the classroom and the age of the building. Students in K-5 would come to school every day. There would not be a remote component to this plan. However, grades 6 through 12 would be remote. So again, we're having more students at home to the tune of about 13,000 students that would be remote, with about 10,000 students getting daily instruction. The benefits for this plan was the consistency for our youngest learners. But again, the consequence or the challenge is having fewer students in the buildings and having more students remote. So those were the two options that the committee came to you as recommendations. What we have been able to do since we met on Tuesday is really look at if we have to have a 9 through 12 remote component, if that plan is selected by you for the A week, B week rotation, what can we do to make sure that that whole child, that high school student, is taken care of? How will they interact with their teachers? How will they interact with their peers? Access to the counselors, to the social workers, to those important tasks. So what we're proposing is sharing what would be the part of the orientation, and then we would use this same model to have students in the building more frequently if we were in Plan B for an extended period of time, or if we have to start school in Plan B. This would make sense because, again, you can't bring everybody in those first days of school. So if you will look at the draft orientation proposal for the high school model, and again, this can be adapted. This is through a good bit of work yesterday and last night and this morning, so it certainly could have some rough edges, but this is where we are today. Taking into consideration how do we have high schools in the building, and it would be dividing your students by period attendance and bringing those students in on an A week, B week rotation. Because our challenge, if you recall, we talked about doing this, but those students would be in school from 8 to 2, 8 to 3. And that was a long time to remain in one period. So what we've said is, what if we adjust that schedule, allow students to come in for a 4-hour day during this remote time, and be in that one period of class, and then at that time, they can work with the teacher on their content area, and also other teachers could work with them, or specialists, whether it be the counselor if they needed to work on college applications, or they needed to work with a social worker, or just have some private time with a counselor to address any kind of concerns or social emotional needs. So we would adjust the high school schedule. And it would be that students would report anywhere, and again, this can be changed, this is an example, from 11 to 3. And we feel strongly that we could do great academic work in that 4-hour period of time. Students would come through with temperature checks, have meals provided, again, staying in that one location, except for time to restroom breaks, hand washing, and a walk outside, just to give them some exercise or a change of scenery. And then dismiss that group of students at 3 o'clock. The 3 o'clock mark was important because if students needed to stay on these this rotational kind of schedule, they could stay for any extracurriculars after school. Really thinking about, this would establish time for the teacher to connect with the student, especially if we have to start in Plan B, to ensure that there's a relationship, there's expectations, students understand their assignments, the devices, all of those kinds of questions. And then also, again, be in the building. Our schools are so concerned about not having students in the building, but they also are concerned about following the governor's mandates that we have been discussing for a couple of days. The challenges, our teachers will be still connecting remotely, but all of our teachers will still be connecting remotely if this A week, B week model is selected. We'll need to think about the planning time so that our teachers have sufficient time to plan for each of these students, each of these classes, because there is face-to-face components for everybody, and there could be remote components as well. So our job would be to make the details be clear, make sure we're communicating what you all wish us to do, and I think this does give some merit to making sure that whole child of the high school world is addressed. So, I will be happy to entertain questions.
I have a question. So with regards to the high school model, for instance, you have a week, and on Monday, you're saying that on a Monday, they would be in the building for a 4-hour time period, correct? And
You're hard to understand.
so what you're saying is there's a 4-hour time period, like so a student would come on Monday for 4 hours, but during that time, 50% of that time is with first period work?
Only, yes. And then they would be working on their virtual assignments from their other courses, or be working with a counselor. That would be determined.
Okay, because that was my other thing is, for example, using band or chorus. Would that be the opportunity for them to check in, maybe if several chorus members are all there on that same day and a chorus teacher needs to work with them on a particular piece, that's the time that they would have to do that?
In that classroom, yes.
Okay.
Could be, yeah, exactly. Because it's their first period class, whatever that may be.
Whatever it is, okay.
And then on Tuesday, it would be their second period class. Wednesday, their third period class. So at some point in the week, they're going to have that time with that teacher in that class.
Okay, I see, okay. And
But
then Friday is just nobody's in the
Friday,
building?
everybody would be remote.
So if, say you have band first period, potentially you would have band for 4 hours?
Yes.
Okay.
Which seems more reasonable than the earlier discussion of 6.5 hours.
So, again, just to make sure I understand it, so this is 50% of the students are in the school, going to their first period class on Monday, their second period class on Tuesday, blah, blah, blah. And then the next week, those same students are home, and the other 50% of the school is coming in doing that same Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, 4 hours in each class?
Yes.
Okay.
And trying to keep in mind all three plans. And our concern, again, as I illustrated, if we begin in Plan C, all students remote, the advantage last year, if you recall, we felt like we were thrown into all remote learning, but the reality of it was that we were at least prepared enough to provide some guidance and instruction prior to the remote learning model beginning across the entire district. This would be a concern. So the advantage would be for the 9 through 12, if you were to choose the week-to-week model, week-by-week model, the advantage would be we would have them week 1 to better prepare to launch them out to the remote learning. In similar fashion, let's say that we begin in Plan A. If we begin in Plan A, And I thought our curriculum department did a wonderful job of emphasizing this. Realize that because of our situation and the potential to move into remote based upon responding to COVID-19, that Plan A does allow us that time for the face-to-face, but instruction will be geared toward the potential transition. That's a tremendous advantage versus trying to start remote without any type of face-to-face preparation. So this is what we're trying to, and again, back to the time span, because that is a key. We don't control it, but if the time span exceeds, if it's a long period of time, a number of weeks, then if that group that is remote, we felt like it was important to make an effort to bring them back in to get that face-to-face contact, again, in terms of preparing them for a better quality remote experience.
So that's my question too. So this is referred to as an orientation, so that you're not proposing that this would be, if we say we have a whole semester of Plan B, God help us, you're not saying that we would do this every single week with the high schoolers. This would just be in the beginning and then maybe somewhere in the middle, or bringing them back in for a check-in. Is that correct?
The committee would recommend that we would, if we start in Plan B, follow this schedule and plan for every third and fourth week to have this model, so that students do have some time at home, so that there's more rigorous attention to academics and moving through our curriculum, and then be able to come in on week 3 and week 4.
So I think you just answered my other question, which is, if this keeps them safe from a public health perspective, why not do this every week? But what I think I just heard you say was that there will be more rigorous learning if they are fully remote. Can you say a little bit more about why that would be more rigorous learning for them to be, having been launched in this way, than to be working from home?
I think from teacher planning perspectives, if I'm teaching a standards lesson on molecules on week A, I will have done some pre-teaching. I may have recorded a video because I also have to teach those students at home. So I'm really split between teaching face-to-face and teaching remotely for a shorter period of time. So I've got to plan out my standards lessons so that I know what students are doing Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, what I'm doing to prepare for both face-to-face and those that are at home. And for teachers to do both simultaneously is tough. So we're not saying that this time from orientation planning, and if we do this on week 3 and 4, teachers will be teaching directly to those students. They're going to be problem solving, doing small group, probably remediation or enrichment. So it's really a check-in, how you doing, what are you working on? It's really that individual attention of helping that student navigate through the course remotely, but having that on face-to-face support as they're in my classroom one time every other week.
Thank you.
Unger, for my comfort, I want to say that the rigor will be based on the standard course of study. So whatever they would have gotten if this had never happened to us is going to be given to them in this situation.
Correct.
You're shaking your head. That is correct.
Absolutely. I think it's going to be important for, as we said the other day, for teachers starting these students and their learning, making sure that the remote work continues and that it's rigorous, that work is graded, that students are keeping up. But it's comforting to know that I, as a student, will have some scheduled face-to-face with my teachers. And I think that's the important, again, if we're in Plan B for extended periods of time. And students will have more contact time with their classes if they are 100% remote. But this makes us think that this is time to check in, get counseling assistance, make sure I'm understanding the content, maybe make up any work that I've missed, those kinds of opportunities.
I would mention and realize in Buncombe County Schools, the academics, the curriculum instruction is always first priority. But we also have, remember in Plan B, we raised this issue early, that one of the areas of operations, we have to get them to school. So bus transportation, this is a high-stress area in terms of meeting the demands of Plan B because the 50% capacity impacts the school buses. So for this particular supplemental option that would occur at various times for the high schoolers, that bus transportation's answered because of the late start. It still allows the full fleet to address the larger majority of students that would be riding that bus. Again, as a former high school principal, we have a fairly high percentage of our high school students that do drive. So that would meet that concern. It still is a wrinkle that our bus transportation would have to work through because we would have pickups for high school students and then we would also have drop-offs in the afternoon. But this model does take that in consider, and that is a consideration. We got to have them transported to school. So in order to start any type of instruction.
So starting at that 11 o'clock time, we would make sure that that allows us to stagger arrival so that they can have temperature checks, get into their classroom without having great numbers of students in the hallways. Better for monitoring.
Could you walk me through an example using this model of a science class that requires a lab, for instance, an AP chemistry class?
I would say that the teacher would have pre-taught
Okay.
the concept, and that would have, it's all in timing. So I've got to make sure that I've taught whatever we're going to practice and that we're following the scientific process. So we've done that remotely. And then planning for when that student arrives on campus, I have this large block of time, up to 4 hours, for students to do the labs, again, following the protocols.
Right, and that could, if this was for extended time, you could theoretically have a lab about every 3 weeks. Is that what I'm understanding?
And we also have electronic gizmos, which are digital labs that students do using their device.
Okay, this all blows my mind, I just got to tell y'all. Not to mention the fact that y'all came up with this in like 48 hours. From when we said something at the day before yesterday's meeting. I'm super impressed. It's just going to take me a little while to absorb and figure out the logistics.
I appreciate that point, and I think that does give me an opportunity to ask this board your permission, and I will also look toward Mr. Campbell. I believe, since again, recall now, our only experience in the COVID-19 world as far as operating the school system goes back to the final 3 months of our school year. That's when we were in Plan C. Okay? Now, Plan C for us for 2021 is a bigger and better and higher quality model. I want to say that out loud to all of our parents and students. But that said, that was our experience. If we begin, for example, in Plan A, where we actually have all the students in the building, but we're still observing the health and safety concerns. We're watching the spacing issues, the facial coverings issue. I think these opportunities, that opportunity to actually see this in operations inside the building will allow us to fine-tune some of these disadvantages that we see when we move into, not only we make it on the spot with Plan A, but with Plan B and possibly even improving Plan C. So versus coming back each and every time to our board, Mr. Campbell, if the latitude is there and the trust with the leadership team, I think these type of adjustments we would certainly make you informed of. Would be very valuable. Again, because the only constant, you've heard me say this over and over, the only constant with what we're facing with COVID-19, the only constant is change and inconsistency. And we have to have as much flexibility to fine-tune and change ourselves in a very short period of time to be the most effective.
Do you want me to address that, Madam Chair?
Sure.
So, Madam Chair, board members, and Dr. Baldwin, the legality of it is pretty straightforward. The governor is going to determine if you're in phase A, B, or C. You can be more restrictive, but you can't be more permissive. So really, the only legal action that the board needs to determine, in my opinion, is are you going to be in the phase the governor designates, or are you going to be more restrictive? So for example, if he chooses phase B, does this school system choose phase C? But if you choose phase B, I believe any action you take today should expressly delegate to the superintendent the authority to make modifications to the Plan B that's presented to the board, and that the board would be informed of that and what have you. But I think that the need, it's up to you, it's a policy determination. But legally, you can give the superintendent flexibility within the approved B plan to make modifications to Plan B. In my opinion, if you were going to move to purely remote Plan C, that would be something that should come back to the board if the governor doesn't order it anyway. So the superintendent, if you're in a Plan B environment, he would have authority to modify that as needed based on experience and conditions. But if he felt like that you could not continue to do Plan B, he would come back to you to go purely remote with Plan C. And again, the only wild card in that is at any time, the governor could close school buildings physically again and thereby put us in a permanent Plan C position. But, you know, the superintendent can't give you every detail. So I think you giving him some express authority to make adjustments would be wise, and it would certainly be legal.
Monger, I have a clarification question for you. If we were to take the shared building model, would this orientation plan go into effect with that model as well, or is this only for the A week, B week?
We would have to do that for 612. I think that we would have an equitable access issue if we did not.
Okay, thank you.
I think that another suggestion would be that as you're determining A week and B week and the shared building model, think in terms of the shared building model is pretty comprehensive, allows the youngest learners to stay in the building each and every day, strengthening those foundational skills. However, is more difficult to transition. If we have students that are with their assigned teacher, their grade level expert, but they're located in another building, transition might be a little more challenging. It can be done because we will work to meet whatever plan that you all select under Plan B, but that's another one of the things to consider.
Ms. Swanger, I have a few questions. Under the model that you presented, the students who are in the off week or the online week, and not the traditional going to the class physically, will they? I noticed that there will be virtual office hours from 7:30 until 10:30 by the teachers, and then classroom support time on the Friday for remote learning. Are all the students going to be required to check in during those times? Even if you're in Group A and you're at the school this week, I'm not. But would I be required to check in each day with the teacher just to let them know, hey, I'm here, I'm engaged,
Absolutely. We've got to find a way, and we're working with the State Power School, which tracks our attendance and grading systems. We are waiting to see how we're able to do that through Power School. If not, we will at least do an exit ticket. We will have some means of tracking student check-in. We did that in our remote learning from March through June, and we watched participation, but we need to, again, formalize that and make sure that there's a true structure so that students are accountable and teachers are monitoring that time in.
Okay. Very good. The other thing I have a question about, since you have, and really this is it was a great idea, basically condensing the class into a one day and keeping those students together. The concern was about changing classes throughout the building. And this seems like an excellent method to accomplish what you set out. You mentioned that when they arrived, you'd be checking them with the getting temperatures and that kind of thing before they enter the building, sanitizing hands, et cetera. And did I understand that they would then be going for lunch?
Lunch will be delivered to the classrooms.
That's what I was going to ask, a big bag lunch kind of thing to the classroom. What about those students who are not in the class physically that time? Are we still going to be providing lunches for students who might be on the off week?
We will need to do that, yes. Our child nutrition department's working on whatever we decide, they'll take it and make sure that we are able to make those points of pickup.
And for those lunches that would be available for pickup, they would be available at the individual student's school, I suppose. If we're going to be running all those cafeterias, are we still going to be relying on, just the cafeterias that we have been utilizing for the feeding program? They're not going to be feeding the entire, I would not think the entire system. Each school would have their own cafeteria staff.
Correct.
And additional lunch would be available there, and they would just work out this.
And we have some satellite programs that, for staffing purposes, we may cook in one building and deliver to another, but
Okay.
meals will be delivered to the students.
Okay.
In designated locations, and also breakfast.
Okay. Thank you.
To see the progress in Jumpstart, that's a great example for you to visit one of our schools. I'll be happy to share, it doesn't start until July 15th, but I'll be happy to share the list of schools, and I would welcome you to visit and see the physical distancing, see how the instruction is going. We're so happy to have the visors so that teachers can teach those reading skills by letting students see her mouth or his mouth, and still looking towards making progress to get students ahead for the next school year.
Any other questions from the board?
Madam Chair, if I could, I need to do a couple of things. First, I need to offer an apology to the people of Buncombe County, to our students, faculty, staff, to Dr. Baldwin and his staff, to the members of this board. It was brought to my attention that during our conversation on Tuesday, some of the things I said were flippant and inappropriate as related to the health of our students in our high schools as we were having that conversation. It was not my intent, but it's been made clear to me that that was the way it was received, and for that I apologize to the public and to people in this room today, and everybody in Buncombe County. I need to do that. I have one question. Well, I have another thought I'd like to add. Thank you for this, because this was, I think as Ms. Churchill said, this was turned around on a dime. My big concern always with the initial high school model that was presented, that was this A week, B week, was that if we as a system were feeling that we could bring students into our schools from a safety perspective, and I just felt we should try it in some manner with all of our students. So I'm appreciative of this. I was worried that what I didn't see with the first plan, I'm glad this is here, but what I didn't see with the first plan was a way to get into Plan B for our high school kids. If we started in Plan C and we were virtual, because of commingling and the scheduling and that part of it, going to Plan, that was never going to go away as long as we were wearing masks and still dealing with COVID-19. So I see this as something I'm appreciative of that you've put together so quickly and brought to us. And I can support this. It's not ideal, but I can support this clearly. I have one question for Dr. Baldwin or maybe Ms. Swanger. You referenced the bus schedule. It jumped out at me 11 to 3. That gives some time for delivery. Is 3 o'clock too close to when we will be sending elementary, intermediate, and middle school students home to not have an adequate bus supply for when the high school, even though it's 50%, it's 50% everywhere, but even though it's 50%, I get where we're okay in the mornings, but are we going to be okay with that from an afternoon perspective?
We may have to have additional bus runs just by sheer numbers of students. So we may run multiple buses to the same neighborhood. So there could be some delays. I think having the same time for those siblings who might watch their younger sibling, maybe that would be helpful to families as well. Transportation, they have a massive job, but Mr. Huff's is giving them great support. Dr. Baldwin's put some plans in place to give them support to do these to establish these runs. The survey that we're going to do next week with families is critical. We need families to be hearing these options and thinking about what works for them, and then letting us know through that survey so that we can begin planning immediately and have a plan in place for whatever the governor tells us. Transportation runs can't be created quickly, so we need every minute, and that's why the survey is critical, the decision today is critical, and then hopefully we'll have Plan A and Plan B well in advance of the governor's announcement.
One thing that Mr. Huff pointed out to me after the meeting on Tuesday that we did not say out loud, and maybe he's coming up to say it now, but is just that there is a difference in terms of busing for elementary and then the older kids. So, do you want to speak to that, Mr. Huff?
I appreciate, if you can hear me with this thick mask on, you're pointing out the difficulty with the elementary because, I can't, thank you. Because a lot of that don't know, because you typically think of 2 to a seat, is the 3 to a seat that elementary, and that is acceptable by state because they're very small. So it produces more of a challenge. When you think about that 50%, really for elementary, it is 1/3. But this plan, either one of these plans is doable, very doable from a transportation perspective. But we have to consider that. So additional buses with additional routing that need to be considered. Ms. Swanger talked about that. We should be able to augment some of those, or supplement, I should say, to the elementary for those extra routes. When I brought up the importance of this decision to give us time, Dr. Baldwin placed 2 weeks in June, latter part of July, 2 weeks, to bring in any additional staff that the schools need so that they can look at their classes, how they're going to divide up, take in consideration a lot of things that actually help us gain a little bit more space by adding family members that are in the same school can sit in the same seat. And not to mention, when you're looking at students that are family members that are between 3 different schools, those schools talking with each other to line them up on the same week, all those things help us out. And like I said, I appreciate Dr. Baldwin's putting in place the last 2 weeks of July, and for the schools to bring on any additional admin staff to make those schedules. I think, like I said, both plans are very doable. And with the time allotted in July, I think we can accomplish. There'll always be a few instances here and there we'll have to make adjustments to, whether it be medical, but I believe we can handle those as well.
So just to clarify, in Plan B, we have to have 1 child per seat, is that correct?
That is correct.
So that means if normally, in normal times, pre-COVID, we could have 3 kids in a seat in elementary buses, now we can only run 1/3 of that bus because we have to have 1. And at the high school level, when normally we can have 2 to a seat, it is actually 50%. And that's why it's tougher with the elementary level.
Yes, ma'am, you are correct.
Okay.
Riding those school buses that this school board does each year gives us a lot of focus as to what the challenges are for our transportation department. And also, I think, it makes us stronger in making these decisions. Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I could add or ask a question, maybe of Mr. Campbell.
Sure.
It would seem to me, I'm not sure that surveying our folks on who is or isn't going to ride the bus is necessarily the best thing to do. Do we have the ability as a school system, from a statute perspective, to in some way, I don't want to use the word require, but to have our families let us know by X date you are or are not going to, I just don't think we're going to get a clear picture from a survey of who is and isn't going to ride the bus.
Mr. Huff can answer that because they do that already, and they may be modifying that process for this.
So there is an opt-in, they have to let us know.
Mr. Bryant, that your concern is the same as mine in this process. With that survey that's going to go out, it really, up front, just with a sheer number, it just gives us an idea of bus totals and how doable with our plan it is. There's going to have to be a lot deeper. That's the reason why that 2 weeks in July is so very important. Those administrators are going to be getting on the phone and doing their own school survey to get those detailed information, and not to mention how critical it is to find those little extra steps that allows us extra, what are the siblings between schools that we can line up their weeks. So your concern is right. So this initial survey, when it just gives us a number, kind of gives us a first draft of the bus numbers. And there's going to be a lot more in-depth planning and personal contacts with family and students when we get into that somewhere around July 15th.
Thank you.
I think I said this before, but I think we need to get away from using that word survey. I think it's confusing, and typically with a survey you get, it's tremendous results if you get 50%. This is something different, I think, and I think we should stop calling it a survey and come up with whatever we are going to call it. But if this is a time for folks to commit,
there will be a direct communication, correct?
Yeah, I mean, this is not about sort of what do you think, but what do you plan to do?
And, we would use the phrase in the intent to commit, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Madam Chair, one question while Mr. Huff is there. And Suzanne, you can weigh in here as well. As far as masks being worn, I assume we're going to basically follow the same edict that came out from the county about if you're in public, you should be wearing a mask. So the students would be required to wear a mask in the school? And if so, have we addressed the issue of who will be supplying the mask? Is it the individual student's responsibility, or will they be provided by the school?
Right now, the intent would be to have enough masks on hand that we can provide to all the students. And I can also report I think in my update I sent you, we did get some supplies from the state that we just got in earlier this week, and that'll be the intent. We fully believe that a good portion, 50%, maybe even greater, will bring masks. That is also one of our things to make sure that they're appropriate masks when they come into the school. But the intent would be that we have enough on hand to meet their needs.
Okay, I was just looking at the dashboard by the Health and Human Services folks, and in the state of North Carolina, they have unfulfilled 5,274,000 orders, or masks, I should say, not orders, but total. They're behind that much. So I think if we're going to do that, we just need to be proactive and get this stuff ordered and make sure it's here.
Very early on,
Okay, very
the
good.
supply that we just now got from the state really just multiplies what we have. So we will have enough on hand to meet all our students' needs. The trick will be, and I'm talking with Mr. White right now, is make sure we establish good burn rates, or these items are expendable. A lot of cases you can't reuse them too many times. Is to make sure that we've assessed that by school, so then we don't drop down below a minimum, and we have good reordering procedures to stay well ahead of it.
Very good, thank you.
We have also, we rounded up, if you remember, all our 3D printers and brought up here to the tune of about 50, and we've been mass producing the face shields, headgear, and the covers. I know Mr. Bryant asked me probably 3 or 4 weeks ago, Mr. Bryant, to have 500 on hand. We've actually doubled that. We're going to at least have 1,000 on hand to get out to the schools. And just been thinking about that recently, how long do we want to keep those up here? I think we would keep those here to make sure we've got that first round, that 2 months worth. But I think further progress with that will be to get those back to the schools and give them the knowledge of how to do that themselves, because if they start getting low, they can produce them right there, and when we kind of alleviate one step of the process as far as the delivery.
Right.
Madam Chair, I have a question for our attorney.
I was just going to recognize our attorney. Go right ahead.
Mr. Campbell, you had mentioned that we are able to be more restrictive but not less restrictive, and I know currently the governor has stated facial coverings for anyone age 11 and up. I think what I'm hearing you say is that if we, as a board, determined that we would want our students, and therefore anybody entering the building, kindergarten on up and to include visitors, be required to wear some type of face shield or mask or face covering, that is something that we have a right to do.
That's an interesting wrinkle in the discussion. The more restrictive I was referring to was not face coverings. It was plan A, B, or C. The governor said, if I choose B, you can go to C. If I choose A, you can go to B. You just can't be more permissive. Face coverings right now, the governor issued a question and answer form with the Department of Health and Human Services in relation to Executive Order 147. And what it says is that masks are required, this is at the state level, for all school staff, adult visitors, all middle school and high school students, when they may be within 6 feet of another person, unless a family member states that an exception applies. And I want to be real clear about this. The exception, there's a list of exceptions. It's in the document. The major one is health concerns or health issues. So if a student has asthma, respiratory problems, if there's some issue that relates to them not wearing a mask, then we need to accommodate that student. We would accommodate an employee. We would accommodate a parent based on that medical type situation. Right now at the state level, there is no opt-out for any other reason other than one of the exceptions that apply in limited circumstances. So a parent just can't say, I don't think my high school should have to wear a mask. So you start there. It would clearly be a disciplinary infraction for a student not to wear a mask at the high school level, at the middle school level. It would also be an employment issue for an employee who doesn't have a medical reason to try to refuse or want to refuse not to wear a face covering, a mask when they're in employment. So before school starts, we will need to come back to you with some policy changes and some recommendations as far as that being part of the Code of Student Conduct, that being part of employment requirements. It is a requirement right now from the governor's office from the state level. The FAQ goes on to say that that face coverings must be worn by students and staff inside the buildings and anywhere on school grounds. They will also be required while traveling on buses and other transportation. So that's a requirement that the face mask, the covering go on your face from the minute you get on the school bus. But then it has this, cloth face coverings remain strongly encouraged for elementary school students, if appropriate for that child, but are not required for them. So right now at the state level, consistent with that age 11 cutoff, the state is saying that it is not required for there to be face coverings on elementary school students. So does that prevent us from mandating them? I don't know, as we sit here today. That is something that we're going to have to look at and think through, because you see the obvious tension. The state is requiring it for middle school students, but the state of North Carolina is saying it's only encouraged for elementary school students, but the governor also recognizes that you have authority over your schools. So is it a reasonable requirement as part of the Code of Student Conduct for elementary school students to wear face coverings? That's something we're all going to have to think about between now and reopening. So it is strongly encouraged by the state, but it's not mandated by the state.
The intermediate schools fit, Chris?
Pardon?
The intermediate schools, you're 5, 6. I would think elementary would be K through 5.
Correct. Intermediate, in my opinion, would fit with your middle school students. And you can use that age 11. That's the other test you can use. So 11 and older, we certainly can require them because they're mandated at the state level.
So if in fact that they're saying that the elementary school students, they're not requiring that, could this board recommend it? Just maybe we don't require it, but we highly recommend those students in elementary school, if parents want them to wear a mask?
Without question, we can make it a strong recommendation. That's clear. Yes, sir. We can highly recommend face coverings for elementary school students. The open question is, do you have the authority to go further and make it a requirement for those elementary school students? And I'm not prepared to give an opinion on that today because this is all brand new.
Campbell, with all due respect, I would imagine we need to come to a quicker decision than August on this, with Jump Start starting July 15th. Those are kids in our building that are of an age, that are elementary age.
I agree with you. I was hoping the governor would have more to say yesterday, but he didn't.
Yeah,
So
and that
now
video,
we're gonna-
and that,
we're gonna jump
I
on.
noticed in the video that those kids had them on, but they also, it was telling to me, much as we do here and much as we see the adults doing, when you've got that distance, there were some that had it on while they had the distance in the room and some that didn't. They were in their space, they were at their desk, they weren't up and moving around, so I would get, I don't know that we as a board need to, but whatever the legal determination is, we certainly need to give some direction to Dr. Baldwin and Jennifer Reed, et cetera, for that beginning in mid-July.
And the other thing too is that, a lot of times what you do is you just make it an administrative requirement that all students wear a mask. And then if a parent says that their child can't wear a mask or they don't want their child to wear a mask at the elementary level, then certainly the first conversation is between the principal and the parent as to why. It may fit one of the exceptions, and then we just move on. If it's just, well, I don't believe in masks, then that's when push comes to shove, and we need to have a legal opinion in place, and we will.
Or just.
But I think that's going to be the exception I hope that'll be the exception rather than the rule is that kind of situation.
I guess my question then would then be, for example, a few months ago when Buncombe County decided to mandate masks within the county, and the state did not have that mandate. And that was, if I understood right, that was something that somebody could be cited for, I can't remember, as a misdemeanor or what have you. I guess that's how I'm kind of looking at it here, is we're our own little city, island, so to speak. We need to be absolutely sure that we are taking care of all of our citizens, and that would include our employees and our volunteers, which may or may not be in the building, to start with. But, a lot of our bus drivers are retired individuals who really come back and drive for us. Then I think of them and their health concerns. And then not to mention, I just think about our younger elementary students who, just by nature, are going to have a real hard time with the 6 feet apart rule. I would feel 100% better if I saw every student with some type of face covering in our buildings, so that it would help to eliminate any, concerns if they forgot and ran up to their friends and gave them a big hug, or their teacher. So I was hoping that I would get an easy one-word answer of yes, but as the law goes, I guess it's never easy.
Well, and let me add one thing to it. You've got to put these things in perspective. When the governor issues an order like this, it is enforceable through citations. It has legal teeth. So I think that was a lot of what went into not wanting to mandate something for children between the ages of birth and 10 years old, was that if they did mandate it at the state level, it's now enforceable through a legal process through citations. That kind of puts it in perspective why the governor didn't go there potentially. That doesn't prevent you from saying, for health and safety reasons at our schools to protect our employees, we are going to make this a requirement. So I want to be real clear. I am not saying you can't require it. Okay. It's just with the lack of any direction on that issue from the state other than, quote, a recommendation, and with the governor deciding yesterday at the last minute not to talk more about because the governor's office knows face coverings is a big issue. They know that. That's no secret whatsoever across the state. So what I'd like to be able to tell you today is absolutely you can mandate it, and why I don't think we should be suspending students right away. We should be meeting with their parents and working through it. I think that's where we're going to land. So I don't mind saying today for public session, I think that's where we're headed is, yes, we will require them, because again, this is for the safety of our employees, and they may have family members that are compromised. And if the entire student body is coming to a building not wearing face coverings, then our employees are not protected.
That is absolutely correct.
So I get, the reason they didn't mandate it at the state level really does not, in my opinion, impact why you would want to mandate it. it's apples and oranges, whether or not it's enforceable as a citation versus. So if that gives you more comfort, I think that's where we're headed.
Yes.
As I said to Mr. Bryant, I was just hoping we'd get a little more direction yesterday. We didn't, that's fine, and we will move very quickly, Mr. Bryant, and other board members, because we know that this needs to be in place, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thing I would like to add to Ms. Churchill's comments is that if we look at the demographic of our student population, and you think about just who are our people, who are our staff and teachers that are going to have more of the closer contact with a student. If you've got a kindergartner, you've got the small children, the runny nose with, take them to the bathroom, all these kind of things, sick, they get sick, get a little tummy ache. Those teachers in that classroom are the mother and father of those kids. And they're very close with trying to take care of those kind of health issues. And they're going to have opportunities to come in contact with body fluid throughout the day. And I think it would be prudent for us. I know we said all the staff would be wearing masks and shield, but it just seems almost prudent that we would also, at minimum, recommend that those kids wear and encourage the parents to send it with the kids or allow their children to wear those for protection of the child plus the staff in the classroom. And in addition to that, I just think that, I don't know, I think about if we were, hopefully and prayerfully never happen, but if we had a child who did test positive and was showing symptoms and did test positive and ultimately did develop the virus, is the governor's office or the Department of Health, are they speaking to anything about steps at that point? Will we be quarantining a whole class, sending them home, and they would just be at home for the 14 days? Is that the status? Okay.
Yes.
So once again, I think it would just be important that we consider that.
I think it's clear that the board has very strong feelings in this regard. And I would like to ask that as the administration works through these plans, that they convey to our administration, our administrators, what the feeling of the board is. And as we move through this, perhaps we would rely on our attorney for help in developing some language in that regard.
Absolutely, and we'll be happy to revisit our policies. And I think watching Jumpstart will give us good data as well. And I think it's important, the masks are so important. I think we also have to rely on the cleaning processes in each of our buildings, the temperature checks, because it's going to take all of those things to keep everyone as safe as possible.
And the mask is one dimension of that.
Absolutely.
So I want to thank Dr. Baldwin and Ms. Swanger for the speedy work that they have done, and this is remarkable. This is nothing short of remarkable. And I also commend this committee, what did we call it? The subcommittee?
The Instructional Delivery Committee.
Well, they have done instructional delivery for a concentrated amount of time, and I want to commend them as well. And at this time, I would look for a motion to approve the Plan B presented to us with, that it would also be subject to further information from the governor. So if what I stumbled across that is, I'm looking for a motion to approve Plan B with a caveat that says that if the governor comes forth with something else, that Dr. Baldwin has the authority to make that adjustment.
Madam Chair, do you need a motion of one or the other of these two options? Because if so, I would make a motion that we do the A week, B week model.
I would
For
second that
Plan
motion.
B.
All right, that has moved quite speedily. Are there questions from the board?
I'd like to see if we could amend that motion to also include that with this option, that we as a board make the decision on face coverings for our students. I'm looking at today being the 2nd of July, and Jumpstart starts in 13 days. I really don't want to hear the strongly suggested or encouraged language, because I feel like there will be elementary students coming into Jumpstart whose parents will choose to, for whatever reason, maybe they just don't feel like going out and buying one, or whatever, they want to make a political statement. I don't know, but I just don't want to wait, and I don't want to put this on the administrators to have to make that decision. So I may be going out on a limb here, but I just feel very strongly that I would like to go ahead and have the board give a vote on facial coverings, and then if we have legal concerns after that, then we have legal concerns after that.
So I'd be happy to amend my motion to say that it would include face coverings for all students K through 12? Is that how that would work?
I think what I would recommend is that, because it will express the intent of this board, is that you amend the motion to say that the AB week proposal is approved, number one. That number two, it's subject to further orders by the governor, what the chair said, what Madam Chair said. Then number three, the superintendent does have discretion to modify Plan B as needed for changed circumstances. And then number four, that the plan should address face coverings for elementary school students, that the superintendent is directed to develop a plan for face coverings for elementary school students. And then that gives him the authority to say, the board has said that we're going to have a plan for face coverings, but that gives him the flexibility to deal with parents that are refusing. So yes, it will be a requirement in the Buncombe County schools, but you're giving him flexibility to kind of work through that, because it is, Google it, and you will find this is the hottest button issue in elementary education in the nation right now, is whether school boards should have the authority to mandate masks for elementary school students. So that's my suggestion, is that you require him to put a plan in place for that. That gives him the authority to kind of work through it.
Okay, so Ms. McMahon is the one that made the motion.
Those can be amendments from a board member, and we can vote on that separately, as an amendment.
I would be
Pleasure of the
okay
board.
with pulling my amended out and have it set as a separate motion.
Accept that as a amendment.
So, but you're saying now, let's not amend this motion, let's do it as a separate vote for the masks.
If other board members would feel better about that, that's fine.
But
Well,
you're
I kinda
talking
liked
about
the
mask.
package that Mr. Campbell gave forward.
I'm good with the 4-point plan there.
Yeah.
And who was the second?
Pat was the second, I
Oh,
think.
Pat, are you willing to accept that as a friendly amendment to the motion, those four things?
Do I need to withdraw my second first, or just,
No.
I'm okay?
No,
Yeah,
you can just accept
I can
that.
second.
Okay.
That gets discussion started, and if there's...
Just for clarity, though, what I heard you say was, this motion is to direct the superintendent to create a plan regarding elementary school level masks.
Correct.
And so that is not us saying a plan that requires masks, it just says a plan. So is that strong enough language?
And I'll
Because the
protect the
plan could say
superintendent.
we recommend. So I'm not sure that addresses what Amy is talking about.
Right.
We can say a plan that will require the use of face masks in elementary school. A plan that will require it, and then he can work on a plan.
I think that language gets more to what you're talking about, Amy.
It does, and it also takes our superintendent off of the hot seat, because he can then go back and say, this was a requirement from the board that I put a plan in place to require a mask. If we don't use the word require, and our superintendent comes out and says that masks are required, I don't feel like that is, I feel like he needs to have the backing of the board publicly, so I feel like it needs to come from us originally as one of those opportunities that we stand as a board, whatever we decide on. And you're right, this is extremely political. It frustrates me. And if this is one way that I can help make sure that 24,000 students in this county are safer when they enter the school building, then that's what I will do. And, I'll take up any discussion that we need to have, here on out about it. I just, and our employees. So
Do we need to specify?
it's very hard for me because I'm really feeling frustrated if we walk out of here and the word required is not in anything. So I think we just got to get a vote from the board, yes or no, on whether we're going to require that.
Madam Chair, I'd be willing to second the motion with the amendment with the word required in there to the motion amendment, however we're grouping that together.
So
So at this point, let me make a suggestion. I think the easiest thing to do based on your discussion is, let's just withdraw the motion for the record. Let me restate what I think the motion is, and then the two of you can decide if that's your motion, and then we'll have more discussion. Would that be okay?
sounds
With me,
good.
is it all right with you, Ms. McKee?
Yes, so there were 4 points, and one of them was this plan, which we now want the word required in.
Correct.
And what are the other, so yeah, if you'll just go over the 4.
Sure. The motion, as I understand it, would be that the board approves the Plan B, A-week, B-week model for elementary, middle, and high schools, as presented by the administration, that is, number one, subject to further executive orders by the governor. Number two, that the superintendent has the discretion to modify that plan as pursuant to changed circumstances. That number three, the board would require that the superintendent develop a plan for the use of face masks, develop a plan that face masks would be required in elementary schools.
Face mask or shields, or can we just say
Face coverings.
face coverings would
Yeah,
cover shields and
acceptable-
masks?
Acceptable face coverings would be required.
Okay.
In the elementary schools, a plan for that they would be required in the elementary schools. And then, was there a fourth? I think that covers it.
Well, Mr.
Those-
Campbell, may I ask a question?
Certainly.
And maybe to you, Amy, should we just say across the board that all students in grades and all staff, grades K through 12, should be required?
That's what I'm getting at, yes.
Yes, and we don't want it just specified for kindergarten.
That's probably a better way to state it. So the third condition would be that all students in Buncombe County Schools, all staff, all visitors be required to wear face coverings, that the Plan B would include a plan for that requirement through the superintendent, understanding that he now then has the discretion within law to kind of work that out for the various groups. Yeah, I think that's a better way to say it.
And just to clarify, the last statement, I think I am a non-medical person, married to several, but I would.
Wait, how many people are you married to?
To medical staff, trained medical staff. But I would, that there are legitimate medical reasons that.
Correct. So the reason we're saying that a plan to make face coverings required for all staff, students, and visitors is that plan will include the exceptions, medical exceptions, other exceptions recommended by DHHS. So thank you, Dr. Baldwin. Yes, that's why we say it's a plan, because there are going to be exceptions at every level. There'll be times to wear them and times not to wear them. We all understand that.
Okay.
As I understand it, my motion is that we accept this A-week, B-week model for Plan B with those 3 points that you just made.
Yes.
And
So
can I
that
ask-
comes up to the 4. And to that, yes, I am comfortable with that motion, and I move that we do
And
that.
you are making this motion thinking about Jump Start, not the beginning of the school year.
No.
This is about, the
This is for the
A-week,
whole
B-week
year.
thing is about the beginning of the school year.
So I know the question will be, what about Jump Start? Is it
In terms of
considered a-
masks? So that seems like a separate motion to me, because if what we're voting on right now is what is Plan B going to be, I think we need to, and then maybe we need a separate vote about the masks for Jump Start.
I'm not sure
I agree.
So I'm comfortable with that motion, thank you.
Okay, do you,
I can second the new motion.
all right?
further discussion. I'm not sure I understand why the Jump Start would be considered differently than the,
It's a different program. program altogether. And so what we focused on here is what we're going to do in the fall. Now, subsequent to this vote in August, it's not the fall, and subsequent to this vote and passing this, or not passing, this motion would clear that out in my mind, and then we can have a discussion about Jump Start, which would focus them, the administration, in that program that we have on the horizon. Okay?
Because this motion is specifically
That discussion
about
is going to immediately
AWP.
follow this vote, correct?
Correct.
Okay, all right, that's good. And one other thing, I would wonder, instead of just using the verbiage, will plan, I think, would it be more appropriate to say plan, implement, and enforce the face mask use in the schools?
Oh, God, no.
I think part of his plan will include enforcement provisions. It will.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
Okay, so I have a motion and a second, and we have discussed. Can I call for a vote, please? All those in favor?
No, we have to
Roll
do
call.
it one at a time.
Oh, dadgum, where's that paper? Here it is. Peggy, get ready to vote. Pat Bryant
Aye.
and Amy Churchill.
Aye.
Cindy McMahon.
Aye.
Thank you for reminding me. Donna Pate.
Aye.
Max Queen.
Aye.
And Franklin is yes. And Peggy?
Aye.
Thank you. That's, it passes unanimously. Now, I believe there is a need for a discussion about Jump Start, and the issue being wearing masks during the Jump Start program.
Madam Chair, I believe Ms. Churchill has a motion she would like to make in reference to that.
Would you say that again, please?
I said I believe Ms. Churchill has a motion she would like to make in reference to
Okay.
that.
Right. I move that we require a plan to require face coverings beginning July 15th to include the Jump Start program of all students, staff, and visitors within the building of Buncombe County Schools.
And on the buses.
And on the buses. Thank you.
Okay, so that's your motion. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do you have
I
a
can second that motion.
Thank you. Mr. Bryant has the second. Is there discussion?
I have a question about that. On the video, were there students shown not wearing masks?
Yes.
The Jump Start video. So does this require us to then go back and remake that
They'd
video?
have to edit that, and I think Ben is able to do
Okay.
that for us.
Okay.
Or is it possible that we could say, as long as students remain 6 feet or further outside, they are okay to?
That's why we're doing, it's a great point, that's why we're doing a plan. Because again, the superintendent will work with the county health director. He will look at the governor's order. The governor's order does not, I'm so glad you brought that up, it does not require a face mask to be worn at all times. I am not violating the governor's order right now so that I can be heard by all of you. So those kinds of real-world practical exceptions will be part of the plan. Thank you for bringing that up. It's
There's
not
another-
a show up with your mask and you can never take it off. That's not true for anybody right now anyway, and it
It's
certainly
not-
won't be
right.
true for the elementary students.
That's
Thank
not
you.
a reasonable request,
Right,
which is.
it'll be a reasonable plan.
Have to be reasonable. If students are working alone at their desk and they're not moving, it would be acceptable for them to take a mask off as long as they're not moving and they're 6 feet apart.
And you saw another example of the young lady jump roping without the mask.
Can't do it.
That's a cardio aerobic activity, and that falls in line with the guidelines provided, Mr. Bryan, as you well know, by the High School Athletic Association that's currently in place for athletes conditioning. So I think as much as we can align with those plans currently in place, recognizing that you know, we want to use common sense with this, but I think the point that I'm hearing loud and clear is that it's not only protection for our students, it's a recognition of our staff and the various levels of susceptibility that our staff would have for negative consequences of COVID-19.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I have a motion and a second we have discussed. I'm going to call for the vote. Find that piece of paper. Peggy, get ready to vote. Pat Bryant?
Aye.
Amy Churchill?
Aye.
Cindy McMahon?
Aye.
Donna Pate?
Aye.
Max Queen?
Aye.
Ann Franklin? Peggy Buchanan?
Aye.
All right, it passes unanimously. I want to announce that this board did Dr. Baldwin's evaluation at the June 30th meeting, and we are very fortunate to have such a competent superintendent in Buncombe County Schools, and we appreciate his work. At this time, I am going to ask our attorney to enlighten us.
Madam Chair, the board has need for a closed session, and that closed session would be pursuant to General Statute 143-318.11A1 to discuss confidential employee matters pursuant to 115C 319 through 321, and also to discuss matters covered under A3, the attorney-client privilege, including the lawsuit of Jackson Pitts as guardian ad litem for Jane Doe versus Buncombe County Schools.
Thank you. So do we vote on that?
You can just say so, we need a motion and second, but they can say so moved.
So moved.
So moved.
So moved.
Very good, very good. We are going to move,
Just second, you need to vote.
so moved, so. Thank you. I have a second from Ms. Pate, and Peggy, get ready to vote. Pat Buchanan now. Pat Bryant, Amy Churchill,
Aye.
Cindy McMahon.
Aye.
Donna Pate.
Aye.
Max Queen.
Aye.
Ann Franklin. Yes. Peggy Buchanan.
Aye.
All right, we are going to now move to Bowcatcher. We're going to Bowcatcher for closed session.
Back here.
Okay, we don't anticipate any action after this closed session meeting, but we will return in here to adjourn.
Madam Chair, the board has returned from closed session. We do not need action by this board on any of the items discussed in closed session, so you are free to take a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you. Could I get a second?
Second.
And we need to vote. Pat Bryant, Amy Churchill, Cindy McMahon.
Aye.
Aye.
Max Queen.
Aye.
And Peggy Buchanan voted.
She was in favor of it.
She was in favor. So the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thanks.